Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Today, we're looking at some more Finnish Mosins. Now in particular today, we're going to be looking at a couple of neat Finnish 9130 rifles. Now these ones are going to be a little bit different than the standard one, and in particular on these rifles, we're going to be focusing on the stock. Now, I had one of our wonderful viewers send me an email regarding one of their Finnish Mosins, and it had a really interesting stock as this rifle does. So let's take a closer look at it. In particular, what we're looking at today is what's known as the potbelly stock. Now, potbelly is an interesting term, and I'm not really certain how well that translates into other languages or for other people whose first language is not English. Potbelly is kind of a weird term here in America. The only context I usually see potbelly used in besides Mosin stocks is referring to someone who's been eating a little too much Kentucky Fried Chicken, if y'all know what I mean by that. All right, so potbelly stock basically is going to mean it's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit bulging out. And that's what we have here today. So let's take a closer look at this. Now, in particular, this rifle, as I mentioned, is a Finnish 9130 rifle. If we look closer at some of the markings, we can get a better idea of what it is we're looking at here. All right. So in particular, this rifle, let me zoom in a little bit, was produced by Carcoski in 1944. Sort of. This is a Carcoski barrel. And this is kind of weird because generally they produced barrels for M91 rifles. Very few of these were then refitted for M39 rifles. Those are actually rare. Those you don't really see very often. These are less common than the M91s, but yeah, I wouldn't call these rifles particularly rare, but I wouldn't call them common at all by any stretch of the imagination. Again, go back to our last video if you want to hear Big Sam rant for the better part of an hour about Finnish Mosin rarity. Okay, so we have a 9130 rifle. Remember I said mostly because this receiver, I believe this was actually produced by the Sestrojetsk factory around 1899. This is a very old receiver. So Finland reused this receiver and put a new barrel on it. But remember, we're really looking at the stocks here today. And if we look just at the outer profile of the stock here, we can see it's actually quite wide, right around here. Now the potbelly term actually refers to this bit right here. So we can see how it sort of goes from normal diameter and then it gets really big and kind of puffs out like a fat man's stomach, if y'all know what I'm saying there. All right. And it's just sort of a big, hefty stock. If you ever picked up one of these, it really feels really meaty in the hands. It's very substantial. You can see there's quite a lot of wood here on the side. So this is probably going to be very durable, very heavy duty, and not going to be as prone to failing like a standard Russian 9130 stock would be. Okay, so now that we have this here, let's look at something else for comparison. And to do that, well, we have another Finnish 9130 rifle. We got this guy right here. Okay, so let me scooch this guy back into focus a little bit so you can actually see what we're looking at. Okay, so our first guy was a Carcoski 1944 barrel. This one is a Carcoski 1943 barrel. And this one also has a hex receiver, although I think this one is like a late 20s, early 1930s Tula receiver, so much newer. Kind of weird to see that, because usually these are on older receivers, the ones that I have seen personally, so it's kind of weird. But let's face it, folks, Mosins are weird, and Finnish Mosins are even weirder. All right, but now if we look here at the outer profile, it's not nearly as thick on this stock, which is really interesting. Now this one might have seen some light sanding by somebody at some point, maybe Finland. It looks pretty nice. But you can already tell though, this is way less thick than that previous potbelly stock. Let me get it back in frame just for comparison so you can see the difference here. See that? Oh yeah. Especially like right here around the sight base. Right here. See that? Yeah, that's very easy to tell. There's a big difference. Okay, so we can kind of tell the difference between a potbelly stock and a normal stock. Sort of. The potbelly stock is also interesting because if we look here, see these splices? It's actually a two-piece stock. Now, as some of y'all may know, that's actually not that weird for Finnish Mosins. A lot of Finnish Mosins have two-piece stocks. This one's actually interesting because this stock is kind of strange. It's also a two-piece stock. Now, when we talk about, well, what's common and what's not, it kind of depends. I would say that neither one of these are particularly common when we're talking about the stocks. Because remember, generally, Finnish Mosins, Finland they used more M91 rifles than they had these 9130 rifles. So having a Finnish stock, a two-piece stock fitted for a 9130 rifle is, again, I wouldn't call it rare, but it's certainly interesting. And it's not necessarily common by any stretch of the imagination. So this is kind of weird. But what's also weird is that we have two variants of a Finnish 9130 two-piece stock, right? We have basically our standard pattern. This would basically be, from a dimensional standpoint, a Russian 9130 stock, except it's been spliced together with two pieces. All right, but if we look at our potbelly stock, right, we definitely see that these dimensions absolutely do not match a Russian 9130 stock. This is way beefier and way wider. And I would have to say the potbelly stocks are, these are not common either. These are kind of a oddity in Finnish Mosins. You can definitely find these, but these are not the most common garden variety Finnish Mosin stock. And our good friend Sean, who I got an email from, his Mosin is very similar to this one. It's actually interesting because it's kind of a hybrid. His is a 1938 Russian 9130, not a Finnish 9130, but Finland probably captured it at some point during the Winter War, or maybe even the Continuation War, and then decided to put it in a new big potbelly stock. So why would Finland make both potbelly stocks and the normal stocks? Well, that's a good question, and it kind of goes back to all the stuff that Finland had. They had all sorts of weird stuff, folks. They used whatever they had at the time. So Finland really liked to use nice new stocks. So if they were at a point where they were able to build these 9130 rifles, which is get kind of weird because this was not the most commonly used gun in their inventory by any means. But they had some, and for some reason they built some of these. Well, if they were at a point where they could have the luxury to build some of these, because again, these sights and the stocks, this would not have been the most common parts laying around in their inventory, and they were pretty strapped. So there might have been points in time, like when they built this rifle, where they also could have afforded to make this really fancy, nice, newly designed two-piece potbelly stock that was going to be less prone to breaking or cracking. So that's one theory, but it's a little weird because that rifle we just looked at was also a Carcoski 9130, but it didn't have a potbelly stock. It had I guess you could say, less robust Russian two-piece pattern stock. And I think that really helps show that, well, The availability was all over the board in the early and mid 1940s for Finland, while they were still at war with the Soviet Union. So, you know, it could have originally had a potbelly stock and it just broke, and so they replaced it with this one. Or this one could have originally had a Russian stock, and then the potbelly stock could have been replaced with it post-war. Now, were these potbelly stocks made during the war? It's hard for me to say at this time. It's certainly possible, but again, looking at resources, I would tend to think that these would either be post-war or very late war. Now, if we do look at M39 rifles, this splice pattern here with these sort of rounded splices is what's known as a wartime spliced stock. We know after the war that M39 pattern rifles switched to basically rectangular splices. That's a post-war pattern stock. So from that, is it safe to assume this is a wartime stock? Maybe. Again, these guns are weird, and we still don't know everything there is to know about them, but we can look at different guns and different examples and start to form interesting opinions or hypotheses about them. So this could very well be, again, one of those things where they were produced kind of throughout the war in, you know, different little splotches of time as they were able to. But again, their primary focus was on the M30, probably on the M91 rifles, because that comprised about half of their army. So if you're going to make a stock, and that stock is going to fit half of the rifles in your arsenal, that's probably going to be a much better bet to go make than making one of these, where you know, you're going to have rifles that it fits, but you know, the demand is not going to be nearly as high for this pattern of stock during the war. But again, that's kind of what makes these interesting, because they're not as common as the M91 stocks. This is another weird quirk about Finnish Mosins, folks, because generally speaking, M91 rifles are going to be less common and more interesting than M91-30 rifles. But in this case, this rifle is actually more interesting than if this was a Carcoski M91 barrel. So, Mosins are crazy, folks. There's all sorts of different little things that can make it interesting or not so interesting. But I think what we want to do now is be a little bit even more scientific, because now what we're going to do is we're going to take both of these stocks, the ones we looked at here, and we're going to weigh them to see if we can, because I think I can tell a substantial difference, but we're going to look at a scale, and we're going to be scientific to see if there's actually a difference. So, first of all, what we're going to do is take our other 91-30 rifle, which is going to be our control here. Remember, that's this guy without the potbelly stock. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get out my scale here. All right, that's a little too bright. Let me zoom back out here. I'm going to get this guy on. All right, and we can switch between pounds and kilograms, because I know we've got a lot of non-Americans watching this, and I don't know how many other people use pounds to measure stuff in 2022. Let's face it, that's kind of weird. Before I do, I need to move a couple things here so we don't hit. Okay, there we go. Now go ahead and hedge your bets on what this standard two-piece stock, basically just a 91-30 with a hex receiver, is going to weigh. All right, well, let's see. And I think it's hitting on something, so I need to move that. Okay, there we go. So you see this guy weighs 3.9 kilograms, or 8 pounds, 10 ounces. Okay, now this isn't going to be exactly the perfect test because, well, every Mosin is different, right? We know that. But I tried to get the best analogy I could, because both of these are hex receivers. They're both Carcoski 91-30 barrels. The main difference is, of course, the stock. We can see, again, 8 pounds, 10 ounces, and 3.9 kilograms for our basically normal pattern 91-30. Both of these even have this weird style front sight that's pretty strange. Thanks, Finland. All right, so was it 3 pounds, 8 pounds 10 ounces? Okay. Let's get our other guy here, and we'll weigh him now with our potbelly stock. And, oh, he's pushing 4 kilograms. It's 8 pounds, 13 ounces. We'll move up a little bit more. We'll just double check that. That's accurate. Yeah, 8 pounds, 13 ounces. So what we've gleaned here is this weighs about 3 ounces more. Now, some of y'all are going to have different opinions on this perhaps, but is 3 ounces that much different? Is it enough to make a difference? Maybe? Could you feel a difference in 3 ounces? Well, this is, again, where it gets kind of weird, because remember, I said that I felt like I could really tell the difference, and I was expecting the difference to be at least like half a pound, but we weren't quite there. Half a pound is, of course, 8 ounce difference. 8 ounces is half a pound, and we were only at 3 ounces difference. So is it enough to really feel? Maybe. Okay. Would it make a difference if you were hiking up a 10,000 foot mountain and you wanted to pack as light as possible? Maybe. Okay. Well, that's fair. But, I mean, I almost feel like that could be in the margin of error for some rifles. Because, again, every stock's going to be a little bit different in weight. Even some of the rifles, the metal in the rifles can weigh different. And also, one other thing, this guy has these sling swivels, which are going to add a little bit of extra weight, whereas our last one didn't. And this has a M39 style pattern cleaning rod, which may be heavier. So if we took both of those out of the equation, this might actually be within 1 or 2 ounces difference. Might even be the same weight, which is really weird to me. And it's not something I was expecting, because when you hold this in your hand, it feels really heavy duty. Okay, this feels like a really, really heavy stock. That's why I expected it to feel so different. Now, why is this? Well, one possibility, without disassembling the rifles and doing a full inspection, which we could do, and maybe we'll do in another video, is inletting. Now, my theory on this is that the entire stock up here is all inletted to help float the barrel a little bit better. Is that actually accurate? I don't know. I haven't had this one disassembled yet. But to me, that's the only thing that would make more sense, because this gets even weirder. And another reason why these guys are heavier duty is the butt stock is actually wider at the back for potbelly stocks. Now, if we look at this stock, we can see here that this is actually an M91 pattern butt plate. Now, M91 pattern butt plates are cool because they're wider than 9130 butt plates. Yeah, and generally 9130 butt plates won't even fit on a stock that takes M91 because they're not wide enough, and it may not fit right. It may, Mosins are weird, but it may not. So heavy stock here. This is actually an M91 stock. Butt plate, even though this is a 9130 pattern rifle. But if we go back and we look at our original stock here, we can see the butt plate here has a 2-less star and a 2-letter Cyrillic prefix. Now, the 2-letter Cyrillic prefix actually came around 1938. So we know this is at least from 1938. And we know they didn't really produce M91 rifles after, let's say, around 1926. So without even measuring this, we know this is a 9130 style butt plate, which is slimmer, which means the profile of the butt stock back here is not as wide. Weird. Now, another cool thing is, remember our viewer Sean, who sent us that email about a 2-piece potbelly stock? Well, I looked at the butt plate on his stock. And he also has an M91 butt plate on his potbelly stock. That one's cool because I could tell by the font on his, it was, despite his rifle being a 1938 Tula 9130 pattern rifle with the same rear sight and everything as this one, the butt plate on his rifle was from an 1894 French contract M91 rifle produced by the Châteauroux factory in France. And you can tell the year from the serial number. Now that's really weird. And again, that goes to show that the two-piece stocks are have wide varieties, but the potbelly stocks in particular are a lot thicker in certain areas. But because it seems like the weight difference isn't that much, there's got to be something going on here, like a secret sauce like that, some inletting or something like I was telling you about. Again, here's our, and let's see if there's any, there's not really any cool markings on this butt plate, but again, this is a lot wider, folks. So this was kind of a weird video, but it's really cool looking at some of the different quirks of weird Finnish Mosins like this. So I hope y'all enjoyed it. If y'all got any more questions, feel free to email me. I always put my email in the description of every video. Let me know if y'all have any prayer requests, and we'll see you next time.